Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar. On behalf of the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable, welcome and thanks for joining this webinar as part of our Safer Chemistry Challenge program series. My name is Cindy McComas, and I'm a co-project manager for the Safer Chemistry Challenge program and also an adjunct professor at the University of Minnesota. Our webinar today is entitled Staples' Commitment to Transitioning to Safer Chemicals, and it aims to provide you with information and resources to help you advance your efforts towards safer chemistries using supply chain strategy. Through supply chain management of product design, Staples, who is a leading office products provider, continues to demonstrate its commitment to moving toward products that are safer and more sustainable. As part of its commitment to help ensure a healthy environment for future generations, Staples seeks to avoid the use of hazardous substances, transition to safer product alternatives, and prefer chemicals that have been designed using green chemistry principles. This webinar also helps to advance our goal of the Safer Chemistry Challenge program, which is to motivate, challenge, assist, and reward companies to find safer alternatives to chemicals of concern that are of concern to human health and the environment. So through this challenge program, we hope to show and demonstrate that it's a unique partnership between industry, states, and nonprofits, that it can accelerate opportunities for you to capture emerging markets for products with safer chemistries, and that it results in a cleaner environment while providing value to your company's bottom line. We also hope that you'll join us for our remaining webinars this fall as part of the Safer Chemistry Challenge program. After this one today with Staples, we have one November 1st on the green screen and using Hewlett-Packard to demonstrate how they've used green screen with their global supply chain. And then we have another tool that's a version of green screen, the Quick Chemical Assessment Tool, or QCAT, and that one will be in early December. So we have just a few logistics to cover for the webinar. During this webinar, all attendees will be on mute. If you have questions, please submit them through the Submit Question option in the toolbar that GoToWebinar provides. If there's time, questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. We would very much like to hear from you about how the webinar helps meet your company's program needs to move towards safer chemistries. So at the end, you'll receive a survey, and please be sure to provide us with some feedback. Next, I'd like to introduce someone who will introduce our speaker and provide a little background on his organization, and that is the Retail Industry Leaders Association, or RILA. Adam Siegel is with us to introduce our speaker today, Roger McFadden. Adam is the Vice President for Sustainability and Retail Operations. So I'll turn it over to Adam.
Hi, and thank you, Cindy, and thank you to everyone who joined the call. I really appreciate the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable for hosting this event. For those of you who don't know, RILA is the Retail Industry Leaders Association. We're a trade association of larger retail companies based in the U.S., and in particular, RILA is based in D.C. We work on a number of issues, policy issues, as well as operational issues. My focus in particular is corporate sustainability, so I'll work with people in CSR, corporate social responsibility, and corporate sustainability roles to help bring them together around retail sustainability challenges and opportunities, specifically in energy and waste reduction, in supply chain engagement, environmental compliance, and then communicating and reporting on those efforts. We have an annual conference every year, the Retail Sustainability Conference. The last one was just a couple of weeks ago, which was our 5th event, and then we also have an annual Retail Sustainability Report. You can view the latest one at, which was actually our first, at retailsustainability.com. So with that, I am very excited to introduce Roger McFadden, who's speaking with us today from Staples. Roger is the Vice President and Senior Scientist at Staples, a position he has held since July 2009 when Corporate Express was acquired by Staples. Prior to joining Staples, Roger held positions with Corporate Express and Coastwide Laboratories, Before joining Coastwide, Roger worked as a consulting chemist and product engineer for several chemical manufacturing companies in both the U.S. and Canada. Roger believes that a revolution is needed in product design with a commitment to green chemistry, and that the future belongs to companies that integrate green chemistry principles to eliminate hazards and waste at all stages of the product life cycle. He also feels strongly that educational institutions can advance the benefits of green chemistry by integrating it in textbooks, curricula, and across multidisciplinary fields including fundamental sciences, business, law, and engineering. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Roger. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam, for that nice introduction. And Cindy, congratulations to you and Angela at National Pollution Prevention Roundtable for your leadership in these sessions. I think they're very informative, and thank you for hosting us. And a huge thank you to all of you who are listening in today. I know you could be doing an awful lot of things. You're probably busy in your own organizations. Thank you for taking this hour out of your busy schedules to share with us today. And hopefully we'll be able to provide some information to you that will be useful. Just a quick opening disclaimer, the information that I'm sharing today in this webinar is intended to provide a general overview of one strategy that's being implemented to make an orderly transition to safer chemicals, materials, and alternatives. It's not the only one, and many of your organizations, I suspect, are working these days in trying to work towards safer materials, more sustainable materials in your organizations. So the work today is in progress, and so it's not fully implemented at Staples, but we're working on it, and so it'll provide you some look at the framework, at least, for what we're thinking at Staples about these days in moving ourselves in an orderly fashion towards these safer materials, considering full life cycles at the same time. The success of any business has much to do with suppliers and customers. So it's important that we not disrupt our supply relationships, because if we do that, we can put at risk our businesses and our relationships and our ability to sustain ourselves as businesses. So we take the relationship with suppliers very seriously, and I think all of you do in your organizations as well. So the idea isn't to create a whole lot of onerous challenges for our suppliers. It's to really work in collaboration with them. So what I'll be talking about in the next few minutes is really some trends and drivers today, some transparency trends that are going on today. I'll share a little bit about our Staples Race to the Top. It's a sustainability strategy that uses and applies our chemical policy that's pending. We'll talk about green chemistry as a solution, and we'll talk about the value of making this orderly transition to safer materials in our businesses. Then I'll finish up talking about the organization, some tools and resources that we've used to help guide us that you may find helpful in your organization. So without further ado, let's move to the first slide, please. Now, if we look at what's going on out in the world today, all of us retailers, we look at this and we see some trends that are moving us in directions that sometimes aren't always comfortable. We see a growing customer demand for more transparency disclosure today. Some of that may be driven by the idea of this rising role of social media, where all of us are beginning to talk to each other through mobile devices and through all kinds of tweets and blogs, and there's all kinds of activity going on where we communicate in a more direct fashion than in the past. We also have biomonitoring studies and science and medical discoveries today that are teaching us new things that we didn't know before, and as we learn more about this, we feel we have some obligation to take some action to move forward on this. And then there's, of course, the regulatory pressures that are both domestic and foreign in nature. that are driving this as well. Next slide, please. So let's look at some of these transparency trends that are going on today and see how those relate to this discussion of going to safer materials. We have this growing supply chain demand for more ingredient disclosure and transparency. I mean, we pick up a box of breakfast cereal and we see the ingredients listed on there, but many of the products that we carry in our retail stores and business operations or use there don't require any ingredient disclosure beyond certain requirements under OSHA and some of the other regulatory bodies that manage that. But we, there is this growing trend by consumers to want to know more. There's this rising market awareness. Consumers are more aware than ever before. Young people are coming out of universities today fully aware and equipped with the right questions to ask. There's this expanding corporate governance policies. Adam mentioned CSRs. There's this idea that companies should be more forthright and transparent in the way they disclose information to their consumers and to their stakeholders and stockholders. And hazard assessments and extended producer responsibilities are becoming part of those today in some of the leadership companies. We also see this kind of new and revised local, state, and federal international chemical regulations such as REACH out of Europe that are beginning to impact even the U.S. market in the way that we move products to market. And then there's really this increasing number of product makers themselves that are responding by going well beyond compliance on their own, voluntarily beginning to list ingredients on their product labels and safety data sheets, which we think is moving in the right direction, and it's helping us in many ways. So we encourage companies to do that voluntarily. Next slide, please. There's also this growing demand for greater transparency across many institutions and industries. What you see here is just some logos and brands of organizations that have already demonstrated their desire to become more transparent. I could add probably some of yours on here as well, but it gives you a pretty good cross-section of institutions that are beginning to really deal in this space. Next slide, please. At the same time, we have our environmental groups, advocates, NGOs, consumer advocates that are also asking businesses to disclose more and to do more in this space. So here's some examples of some of those organizations that we belong to, that many of you belong to out there. There's probably many others that could be added to this list as well. Next slide, please. There's also this growing state-level support for green chemistry. I've really picked out three. There's many other states that are doing this, but the three that I picked here just to put in front of us today are the states of Oregon, states of Michigan, and the state of California. In Oregon, the governor of Oregon, Kitzhaber, just issued an executive order, a green chemistry order, and what he's really doing there is asking the state to walk the talk and saying that if we're going to promote these ideas of greener chemistries and greener products, then we need to demonstrate that ourselves in our own agencies. State of Michigan did a similar thing actually before Oregon, and then of course you're all probably familiar with the activity that's going on in California today with DTSC and what's happening in that space. So all of these are real trends and drivers for us as we begin to try to figure how do we manage this complex supply chain. Next slide, please. So at the same time we talk about retail, and so this is focused somewhat on retail today, but I would tell you that many retailers actually do a lot of B2B business. Staples, for instance, is growing very rapidly in our business-to-business side of our ledger, and so we're really looking at what other businesses are asking us to do. And here's kind of a list, a short list, if you will, of some of the things that businesses are saying to Staples. We would like you, Staples, to help us meet our sustainability objectives, and for you to be more transparent with us and to collaborate with us and to create communication throughout the supply chain with us. And these are just some of the topics that we pulled down off the communications we have with our customers today, and you'll see many of those are going to require a lot more transparency and collaboration in figuring out how to report to these various important areas that they've selected for us. So the next slide, please. So now I want to talk a little bit about what Staples is doing these days in supply chain strategy towards moving ourselves in an orderly transition, towards these safer materials, because it does need to be orderly. And the reason it needs to be orderly is, next slide, is because if you look at any of the retail sector supply chains today, you're going to see hundreds of thousands of products in them, tens of thousands of chemicals that are in those products, and thousands of suppliers that are spread across the globe. It can get really complex really fast, and these multi-tiered supply chain challenges are really onerous for all of us retailers who are trying to do the right thing here. And so it isn't as easy as it may seem at times, but nevertheless, we need to tackle this. And so if we don't make it orderly and we don't have prioritization, then it'll collapse real quickly, right? Because there's so many products. So we have to figure out in some fashion what will we tackle first, how will we go about getting our supply chain and the products in our supply chain in an orderly and headed the direction that we want it to go. We can't do it all at once, and we need to be respectful of existing status quo supply chains that exist and not disrupt them so much that we economically collapse because of it. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about chemicals, because sometimes us retailers get accused of kind of being the quasi-regulators, and we're really not trying to do that. Our objective isn't to replace regulations or to be regulators. We're really responding to consumer demand, the customer, and what they're asking us to do. And sometimes I think we're accused of maybe applying an awful lot of pressure to the chemical industry itself. But let me just say real quickly that chemicals are a key element of our supply chain and the global economy. And they have been for a long time, and they always will be, because chemicals are extremely important. They are what make up the foundation of products. And the idea isn't to eliminate products. The idea is to move to safer chemistries and safer products and apply green chemistry. So the idea isn't to take out and eliminate beneficial products at all. It's just the opposite of that. And so the idea is that the solution, the best way to solve this problem we have of where chemicals of concern are in our supply chain, is to employ the chemical industry itself. That is, those folks have the knowledge, they have the resources, and all they really need is the commitment and the willpower and the desire, and maybe more importantly, the marketplace for these changes to be done. And so I view the chemical industry as a solution, not as the problem. And certainly there could be those who would point the finger and say that they've created some of the problems, but in a sense we're all responsible for the problems. That's why extended producer responsibility is an important strategy. So next slide, please. But at the same time that we know chemicals are beneficial and really have done some great things for us over these last decades to help our economy and to help our businesses grow, we have to accept the reality that not all chemicals are created equal. They're diverse and different. They're different in their hazard traits, their exposure routes, their ecotoxicity endpoints and human health endpoints, exposure routes. The degradation and combustion byproducts are critical here, because these products can burn and are burned and will degrade, and what they degrade into are extremely important for us to understand to be able to make informed choices. Next slide, please. So if you can imagine, and this slide I like because it's a world we all live in. You see, businesses and customers, suppliers, they can be in different stages here. So we can have some, let's say you have a supplier that's basically a legal compliance-driven company who basically says, we just want to be in legal compliance, we're happy there, that's where we want to be. Let's assume we have a customer on the right-hand side that says, well, we don't really think that way. We know we want to be in compliance. That's a basic buy-in for business. We want to be in a leadership position, so we want you as a supplier, Staples, or any retailer to help us to meet our objectives. So if you have a supplier that's on the left-hand side that basically views everything through a legal compliance lens, and then you have a customer that wants to drive business value, you can see we're sandwiched sometimes in between, and it can be a little bit challenging because when we go to the supplier base, they don't always understand why we need to ask what we're asking for and what we're going to do with it when we do get it. So I think this represents somewhat the diversity of the business world today. It'll probably always be like this. I don't think we'll ever get everybody to the right side. It would be nice, but I suspect we're going to have kind of this kind of mix of chemicals, a mix of companies and suppliers and customers. Next slide, please. So what's in it for us if we do this right? Well, first of all, the compliance-driven companies aren't going to really be harmed by this because the idea is as we move to safer materials, you're still going to be in compliance, and some would argue that you'll be ahead of compliance when you do it that way so that you'll be able to be there when the new regulations do kick in, you'll already be there. So whether or not you believe that or not, you really can't get harmed by the idea of orderly transition to safer alternatives if you are going to live in the compliance world, because it is going to help you be compliant. But it really does open the door for this creating shared value for customers, communities, and companies if we can do this the right way. So that's kind of shows the two avenues there, and there's something in it for everybody if we do this right. Next slide, please. So what we've done is we've developed, we really realized that we really need to have a guiding document. We need something to guide us, something that keeps us focused towards our objectives. So we've generated a draft chemical policy. It is not fully implemented into the company, so I'm not going to suggest that at this point, but it has been vetted widely within the organization, and there's a lot of support for what we're wanting to do here. We have a lot of work to do to try to piece it all together and to make sure that it really works for our organization, but I'll, for the next few minutes, share with you some of just a glimpse of the inside of what this policy looks like and what it intends to do. What we're really doing is responding to customers' demand and need and want and desire for inherently safer products, inherently safer for human and environmental health. That's not to suggest that the products today that we offer, our retailers offer, are harming people or killing people, or it's not suggesting that at all. It's the idea that if we can design products at the early stages of designing hazard out of those products, then we don't have to pay the price that we paid later by accidentally or unintentionally allowing those chemicals to get into our supply chain. So it's really thinking ahead, and it's taking a precautionary approach to things and a life cycle approach. Next slide, please. So we announced here not long ago this idea of a race to the top, and what this is really about is it's saying that our current supply chain contains an awful lot of what we would call non-sustainable materials. Now, they can be non-sustainable for a lot of different reasons. They can contain too much packaging. They can contain chemicals that we don't want in them. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that to be there, but the idea is we want to reverse that trend and to bring to market products that are more sustainable and that are safer materials and safer alternatives to offer to our customers. As part of this, we realize we can't do this alone. No single organization is big enough or have enough resources to do this alone. We have to do it collaboratively, and we really believe that it's our suppliers and our suppliers' suppliers that give us the ability to accomplish these objectives. So we've had lots of dialogue with our suppliers at different levels, not all of the suppliers, but some of the key suppliers we've had some discussions with. And then we've even moved this discussion one level higher, and that is that we're talking now to some of their suppliers to help them understand why we're asking for this. Because sometimes our supplier will say, gosh, we'd like to get that for you, but our supplier won't give it to us. And so we've begun some discussions with the chemical companies even at that level to explain to them the value of doing this and why we would like to see them invest in safer materials. And frankly, I have to tell you, I'm very optimistic in my discussions, in our discussions with some of those chemical companies. They're really beginning to move in a very positive direction. We're very pleased to see that, and we think there's going to be some really positive outcomes from these discussions we're having today. Next slide. So what this does is this chemical policy really aligns with our sustainability objectives. So it isn't that we're going to have a chemical policy out here hanging out by itself. It really is focused directly on our sustainability side of things to be sure that we meet our overall sustainability objectives, and this chemical policy is just one of those tools to help us achieve our overall objectives. Next slide, please. So what we really needed was some guidance. We needed to have some principles. So we reached out here a few years ago to the BizNGO working group. They're a group, kind of a collaborative group of businesses and NGOs that have been working collaboratively together. Some very big brands are included in that, and some very, very influential NGOs and environmental advocacy folks who are engaged in trying to figure out how do we frame this in such a way that's somewhat harmonized in the marketplace and in the supply chain. And they came up with these 4 principles which we really support. This idea we need to first know and understand the product chemistry itself. Then after we know it, we need to be able to assess it and with the objective to avoid the hazards where we can, and if we can't avoid them, to be able to create proper exposure control processes and manage risks. To commit to continuous improvement, one of the problems we have is sometimes if we use eco-labels only, eco-labels are somewhat slow to respond sometimes to new science, and they're collaborative efforts. They're important. Customers value them, but we need to have continuous improvement built into the system to be able to stay up with the new knowledge that we gain. And then, of course, supporting industry standards to be able to develop harmonization and encourage, public ingredient disclosure throughout the supply chain was all part of these principles that we subscribe to. Next slide, please. So the overall goals of this policy is really to, first of all, be proactive and to ask suppliers to be more transparent about chemicals and products. In a moment, I'll show you some of the things that we're asking them to do, with the objective of avoiding product-based pollution. That is, that products are not thought of as pollution, but in general, if we aren't careful, products can become pollution. What's contained inside the container can be, or the container itself. There's a whole lot of opportunities for pollution that a product can bring to the front line, and by really thinking ahead of time in product design, we can avoid those things. Avoiding the hazard at product design stage is important rather than paying for the costs later. Those externality costs make an early transition, and then we want to avoid and or recover our costs associated with regulatory noncompliance. Our retail operations, we're required to comply with local, all the regulations where we do business, we have to comply, and if we get out of compliance, it costs us something. It can cost money, it can cost reputation. So the idea being that the chemicals policy can guide us and prevent us from getting into that trouble. Next slide, please. So here's what the policy will do. It will it requests product chemistry and hazard endpoint data from suppliers. It prioritizes the chemicals of high concern for elimination. If we can't eliminate them, at least we'll understand why we can't, that there aren't alternatives, and then we can move to other things like green chemistry solutions and so forth to move us downstream later. Create collaboration with our suppliers. One of the things this does is it brings a dialogue between us and our suppliers in a meaningful way. And then the idea will be to develop a scorecard to measure the progress and evaluate the results with our suppliers. So we'll be asking our suppliers to develop with us scorecards and to report to us, their progress along the way. Next slide. So now let me go through real quickly with you what we're more specifically asking our suppliers to do. And so first I'll go through the challenges. Here's what we're challenging our suppliers with. We're not telling them they have to do this. We're really challenging them and saying, wouldn't it be great if you could think like this? So the first challenge is when there's credible evidence that a chemical in a product may result in harm to human or environmental health, we should strive to eliminate the chemical, replace it with a quality, affordable, safer, and more sustainable alternative. So the idea here being more of a precautionary approach to things than waiting until the regulations make us do it, to try to anticipate it in advance. So we would like to see them begin to think like that. Next slide. The next thing is to challenge the suppliers to consider chemicals of concern in their products to be pollutants or contaminants or defects. We believe that when they begin to do that, it changes fundamentally the way they think about their product, because the quality portion of product often doesn't think this way. It doesn't think of a chemical used functionally within a product to be a contaminant. It thinks of it as being a benefit. And if, in fact, that chemical, because of other reasons, becomes a pollutant or a contaminant, it could change fundamentally their time frame to be able to get it out of their product and to move to something that's more safe or safer. Next slide, please. So we're challenging our suppliers to consider direct or indirect chemical exposures to vulnerable subpopulations. For instance, if their product is likely to be exposed to children or women of childbearing age or to workers who use it again and again and again as part of their work, we're challenging them to think a little bit more about that and to think in terms of, do the chemicals that they have in their product today, is it likely that they could harm these particular subpopulations? And if so, then would they be willing to look at alternatives on that basis? Next slide. Then we want to challenge our suppliers to consider life cycle impacts of chemicals, including harmful byproducts of degradation and combustion. Often LCAs, life cycle assessments, often don't always look at the degradation or the combustion byproducts that are generated from the chemicals that are in the product itself. And we are challenging our suppliers to begin to at least consider looking at those issues, realizing that sooner or later their product will degrade in some fashion or will be burned up either intentionally or not intentionally, and what will those combustion byproducts be. Next slide, please. We also challenge them to look at life cycle cost. Often we are guilty, I think, of only looking at the initial cost of products and not understanding that there's associated costs with products related to handling and use or disposal, recycling costs. We always view recycling as a real positive, but recycling can cost money too. You have to collect materials, you have to rework them. Certainly not suggesting recycling is bad, but we do need to begin to look at this full life cycle costing idea, capture those costs where we can, and then begin to communicate those costs to the consumers so they know that there's savings for them by buying products that are more sustainable. Next slide. And then we really challenge them to also look at the trade secrets and confidential business information kind of exemptions. Often suppliers will not want to share information because they view the information as confidential, and certainly we respect that and recognize that there certainly is legitimate confidential business information that could economically negatively impact businesses if that were to get out. But we have seen models where information can be disclosed in a more protective manner that can do two things. One, it can create more transparency to make more informed decisions for us, while at the same time protecting their right to protect their information. So we're challenging them with at least looking and talking to us about models where we can begin to share that information in a way that will work for us and protect them. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about specifically, as I kind of ramp up here and end this, is what are we asking our suppliers to do specifically? And so it's in some categories. The first category is compliance. So we want them to be aware of and demonstrate compliance with all regulations for chemicals. And you might think that that's just, you know, like breathing, that every business does that. But in reality, compliance is not that easy sometimes. And sometimes it isn't that any company intends to be non-compliant. The non-compliance is created sometimes by getting a little sloppy or not having a strategy or a process that captures all the regulations. There's an awful lot of them out there. But we're really asking them to be aware of and demonstrate compliance with all the chemical regulations out there, to know and understand and comply with those regulations that govern their product or the chemicals in their products, and then to view legal compliance as a fundamental business requirement. So that's the first part that we're asking them, is just to basically do what they're probably already doing in many cases, but we just want to be sure they recognize that that's important to us. Next slide, please. The next one is restricted substances lists. There's a lot of those emerging out there today. We have one as well. It's called our bad actor list. We're sometimes criticized for using bad actor, but frankly it was chosen on purpose because it gets the attention of the supplier, creates a nice dialogue with them, and they recognize that what we're really trying to do is put them on notice that these particular chemicals on this list are of concern to us. More importantly, they're of concern to our customers, and that we really want to work with them in a orderly fashion to move away from these chemicals to more safer materials. We want to do that, though, and not jump from the frying pan into the fire by having regrettable substitutions made. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but we want to make sure that there is a real thoughtful way of moving from where we are today to where we want to be. And so restricted substances lists are important to do that. Suppliers are getting inundated these days with these RSLs from a whole lot of different places, and it's challenging for them. And I think that says maybe RILA, Adam, you and your organization can serve that well, I think, beginning to maybe coordinate some efforts to harmonize in some fashion so that it makes it more economically feasible for the suppliers and the retailers to do this together. Next slide, please. Chemistry disclosure. We're asking our suppliers to know, disclose, and verify chemistry in their products, to build the knowledge of the materials, you know, with their manufacturers in use. That is, understanding how those chemicals are used in the processes that make their products. And then to view transparency as an important way to build credibility through the supply chain. So rather than viewing transparency as disruptive, view transparency as a way to build credibility throughout the supply chain so we can talk more comfortably with each other along the supply chain. Next slide, please. The chemical hazard assessment, this is important. We really have embraced the green screen for safer chemicals from Clean Production Action. They're an NGO group. We really think they have a great tool here. It's a tool that basically compares materials across a set of hazard endpoints that are important for us to make decisions with. It doesn't necessarily make the decision for us or for you, but it does provide you a quick way to look at the various endpoints that chemicals have, and then apply your lens of decision to that. So we really like the green screen approach to things. Next slide, please. So safer alternatives assessments, we think after the green screens are done and we recognize that there are certain chemicals that we may not want into our products and that there are alternatives possibly available out there, we really need an assessment made of those. So one of the places where we've gone to get some help in this is the EPA Design for the Environment program. They have a partnership program where businesses and the government agency can work together in tandem and collaboratively, and they do an excellent job of looking at safer alternatives assessments. They don't make the decisions again for us, but they can provide some great input into the assessments so that we can make more informed decisions about this. And so we're asking our suppliers to consider using them or other safer alternatives assessment strategies or tools that they may choose on their own. Next slide, please. And we can't avoid the idea that there just aren't any alternatives at this point for certain chemicals within certain products, and that's okay. We can apply and employ risk management and chemical safety processes and techniques that have been in place for a long time. And so I think the idea is to not do that first. The idea is to look at hazard, removing hazard, eliminating hazard early in the stage, and then when we can't get there for whatever reason, then we can employ these other very effective ways to manage this. So we're asking our suppliers to do that as well. Next slide. Preferred substances list, this is where we really want to go. We really don't want to be spending a whole lot of time talking about the don'ts. What we really like to do is talk about the do's. And so, but to get there, we have to have a reliable way to be able to share with our suppliers what materials we prefer. So the long-term plan here is to develop a list of materials, preferred materials that we can share with all of our suppliers and say, if you have a choice, we would like you to use these materials. Now, we're not telling them they have to, but we're really suggesting that these are preferred to us. And if your product would use these types of materials and replace the ones on our RSLs, that would be a very positive thing, could build some great relationships with us and forge a stronger supplier-customer relationship. Next slide, please. And then we are asking suppliers to really seriously look at green chemistry and green engineering as a solution. And my next slide will talk a little bit about that. But the idea here being that we can't tell them they have to use green chemistry, but we would like to encourage them to use green chemistry thinking because we think it's just really smart way to think about designing products. Next slide. So what is green chemistry? We're really suggesting that it's used as a solution. It's a science. It's not a regulation, so we don't view green chemistry as something that you regulate with. It's really a very smart way to think about designing molecules, chemicals. It's 12 principles that have been laid out very succinctly. Many organizations today, some of you on the phone are probably applying those principles in your own organizations today. And we really want to prefer companies who use green chemistry principles in their products, and we want to hear from them. We want the suppliers to tell us about that and to talk to us about that and share that information with us. And in return, we, of course, would like to prefer products that are designed with green chemistry. Next slide, please. So everybody wins with safer chemicals. Nobody can lose here. And I had a great conversation, and I'll end this with a conversation I had with a chemical company, which I will not give the name of. I will just tell you that they're a major player in the chemical industry. And I was invited to meet with them here not long ago. And I was absolutely impressed with the approach they were taking. They were basically saying, we know there's some chemicals in our supply chain ourselves that we really don't want there, and we really need to figure out a way to get them out. And they were engineering a new molecule at that time that would actually cannibalize and replace some of their own chemistries with these more safer, more sustainable materials. And we just applaud those companies for doing those kinds of things. That's fantastic. We're excited about it because what better way than to have them replace their own? You know, there's examples of a lot of companies, big brand companies that are no longer in business today because they didn't do that. They didn't stay up with the changes themselves. They let somebody else, you know, draw the plays, and they lost the game. And so this is really encouraging to see this. So, but everybody wins in this, and so this shared idea of shared value, the idea of businesses, suppliers, customers, and communities all sharing in the benefits and the value of moving to safer chemicals is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Next slide, please. So my last slide before we go to Q&A, and we'd like you to type in when you can or along the way questions that you may have for us that we've generated in our talk today. But here's a list of some of the organizations, tools, and resources that we've used to help guide us. There's many others too, but these were some of the ones that I thought might be appropriate for this presentation today. And you know, we would encourage you to reach out to these organizations yourself. They're great people. You will really enjoy working with them. They're very collaborative thinkers. They really want to help you and your business be successful, and that's kind of their mission. And so please just feel free to reach out to them on your own. If you need any contact information, just reach out to me. My email address will, I think, be up here shortly, and you can send me an email. Next slide, please. So I'll leave you with this. There are risks and costs to a program of action. So whenever we're going to do things, there's certainly risks to doing things, and there's even costs associated with some of that doing sometimes. But they're far less than the long-range risks and costs of comfortable inaction. So I think we're at that point in chemicals management where if we don't take action now, preemptively, we're likely to face some long-range risks and costs downstream because we haven't taken action. And I think all of us who are in businesses today that are looking for ways to differentiate ourselves and to be sustainable businesses ourselves recognize the value of what John Kennedy said many years ago in this space. And then the last slide is just my contact information. Thank you very much. I sure appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you today. And so why don't I turn it back to Cindy, or is it Angela? I'll send it back to you for Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Roger. We have some questions. Actually, we have several questions. The first question, let me get the screen up. How can state agencies help in this process?
Okay, how can state agencies help in this process? There's a lot of state agencies out there. I'm assuming we may be talking about environmental agencies or related to safety and chemicals. I think that the state agencies, I think, are drivers, and I'm not saying that's what I'm suggesting they do, but they are absolute drivers in this space because if, for instance, federal regulations don't require disclosure and require more transparency because of political barriers or whatever might be in place, we've seen states on their own do those things. And for retailers, that can be challenging because rather than responding to one overarching regulation, we respond to 20 or 30 or 40, and that can be a challenge. However, I'm not going to suggest that states don't do that. They have every right to do that, and I think they've played a role in driving some of the changes that are out there today. So I don't pretend to give advice to the state agencies. They can do they do really well on their own. So.
And second question: does Staples know about environmental recognition programs in certain states?
Do we know of recognition programs within states? Yes, there's some great recognition programs within states that are out there today, and I think those are great. Those are good drivers. They're really good ways to get people. I mean, we want to get people doing the right thing, right? So you can either get them to do the right thing by punishing them with some regulatory responses, or you can encourage the ones in leadership positions that there's benefit for them to invest in that differentiation. And I think the recognition programs are really good for that, because they really recognize the ones that are doing extraordinary things, and that encourages others to want to do it as well.
Great. And this is a there's multiple questions. The first part is, what evaluation methodology are you using to compare chemicals?
Yeah, the assessment part of this is important, and I can't share at this point. There's some negotiations going on currently with several groups on this, so I don't want to bring any specific names up because it wouldn't be fair to the others. But I would say that that's an important part of this, the assessment part of this. We really believe third parties are going to play an important role, independent third parties. The reason for that is that we have not only the transparency between our supplier and us, we have another transparency that we're going to have to face, and that is our transparency between ourselves and our customers. And so customers are less likely to buy into the idea that that everything that we come up with is accurate. So our approach to this is to use independent third party to review the data, to do peer review on the data, so that when we do submit it, either publicly in reports or more specifically directly to customers, that there's credibility behind it and integrity behind it. So I don't want to talk about any specific names at this point, but would tell you that that's part of our strategy.
Okay. Are you focusing, sorry, my screen moved. Are you focusing your chemical evaluation on hazard, exposure, or a combination of both?
Yeah, it's going to be both. You can't really do one without the other. I think what has happened, our assessment of this has been that there's been a lot of attention over the years paid to risk assessments and to LCAs, which are two very important tools. We in our evaluation of those two, often the hazard assessment is lacking, or at least isn't looked at in the right order of things. And so we think they're extremely important to include both, and actually all three if we can. So we'll be integrating that all together to help us make an informed, a more informed choice. The idea being, if we can eliminate hazard early in the design stage, then we don't have to build exposure controls in later. So that's kind of our thinking of getting it in that order. But they're all important.
Regarding the green screen, there's several questions regarding that. The first is, who is conducting those assessments? Is it Staples staff, outside consulting firm, the suppliers?
Yeah, actually, in green screens, it's done by there's actually the green screen, the Clean Production Action group. They actually select the organizations that do those green screens, and they have to meet a certain criteria to be able to do them. I will name Tox Services is one of those, and NSF International are two organizations that I know of, and you'll want to reach out to Green Screen and to Clean Production Action to get a current list of the others who are qualified and certified to do those assessments. But we do not do those assessments ourselves. We would have those done externally, and then of course we would review the data as it came into us to help inform our decision making, but we wouldn't actually do the green screens ourselves.
Are you concerned about the liability of discovering a chemical of concern in your products that can't be removed for one reason or another? Yeah,
well, there's always risk, isn't there? I mean, there's the risk if you find out that it's there, and then there's the risk if you don't look. So I think the risk exists. If the chemical of concern is in the product, I think it probably somewhere in the not too distant future, when analytical equipment and technology advances itself to where you can virtually find chemicals relatively easily and economically in products, then we're all in trouble if we haven't done our homework. So we think there's risks of not knowing and there's risks of knowing. So it's just kind of balancing those out. We happen to believe that knowing is going to help us make a more informed choice than not knowing.
Okay. And can you give some examples of changes made to inventory success stories?
Yeah, there's lots of them, and I don't want to take a whole lot of time. I think maybe one of the ones that jumps out and that probably resonates with a lot of retailers today that carry cleaning products in their assortment. Nonylphenol oxalates, and I don't want to get too technical here, but nonylphenol oxalates are surfactants. They're non-ionic surfactants, and they're very biodegradable. They're really functional. They've been around a long time. They've done a lot of good things in the sense of bringing the benefits of surfactants to the front end of a cleaning product. But when we recognize that the degraded product, that is when they biodegrade to a very toxic substance, it didn't take us very long once we learned that to recognize we needed to get out of that. And so we've that's one example where us and many other companies have recognized there are safer alternatives that can be used that are just as functional, that bring just as much performance, that now don't cost any more to use. So that would be one example.
And unfortunately, we're running out of time for questions, so just one more question. How do you encourage your customers to choose safer products if the greener products turn out to be more expensive compared to traditional products of the same type?
Yeah, I think that there's two areas there. One is performance is often a barrier to green, and then cost. We haven't found cost to be that critical in the sense that when you incorporate life cycle cost thinking and you begin to articulate that with the consumer, and that gets to be a little complicated sometimes, but if you can articulate that by going to a greener product, you actually reduce your cost and get away from the sticker cost of things, you can begin to deal with that. Also, the collaboration with suppliers, you see, it's about scalability. Often the reason that the green product costs more, if in fact it does, and in many cases we don't always see that it costs more, a lot of times there is cost neutrality there. It's often related to the idea that the existing chemical that's in play is being made in huge amounts in an infrastructure that's been out there a long time, and the replacement product or replacement chemical, not as much of it's being made. There's infrastructure costs that have been associated in building it that have to be recovered. So some of that is getting ourselves to be scalable in a quicker way. That's why I think the collaboration where we can get more companies moving to these safer materials will drive more of them to be made and more of them to be sold, which will ultimately drive the price down on those items, is kind of the strategy that we think works. But it'll take some time to make that happen.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. Please feel free to contact Roger if your question was not answered.
So this is Cindy McComas, and I'd just like to wrap up by first of all thanking Roger for a truly excellent presentation. I always like to say that the high number of questions is a sign that you got some great messages across to your audience, and I think that definitely was the case here. It's very impressive how your chemical policy guides your supply chain strategies to reduce these chemicals of concern. So thank you very much for your presentation and your content there, Roger. I'd also like to thank all the attendees for staying with us today, filling up our full hour here, and I'd like to remind folks to please complete the survey that you'll be receiving shortly after the close of this webinar. We do want to hear from you. We have a number of very exciting upcoming events this fall I wanted to mention. We have a Green Chemistry and Economic Development Conference in Chicago in mid-November, the 13th and 14th, to be shortly followed by a green screen one-day training also in Chicago associated with that conference. And of course, you've heard Roger talk about the green screen as a tool, so we hope that you will take a look at that agenda and join us for that. You can find that agenda on the National Pollution Prevention website, which is at p2.org/challenge. And then our next green screen training, if you can't make Chicago, will be in Minneapolis on January 24th, 2013, in conjunction with the Minnesota Green Chemistry Conference, which is called Beakers to Business Plans. And that one-day conference will be held on January 25th. So the green screen will be immediately preceding the conference. And again, we hope you can join us for one of those. So take a look at our website, p2.org/challenge. Please consider seriously joining the Safer Chemistry Challenge program so we can keep this information coming to you. And contact us with any questions that you may have at saferchemistry@gmail.com. Thanks again, everyone.